Alright guys, before we get started, I do want to warn you that I bought a new microphone recently and I'm still kind of fiddling around with the settings to that, so if things don't sound really as good as they usually do, which right there is kind of an oxymoron, that's what I'll blame instead of my own incompetence. But none of you guys care about that, so let's go ahead and move on with the review. I feel like I need to balance out the cutesy bullshit from the last two anime reviews, preferably with something violent and masculine as fuck, so let's talk about Goblin Genocide. That's right, Goblin Slayer. You know, that anime that came out 2 years ago? It was really dark and violent. A bunch of journalists got pissed off at it because of the first episode. Come on guys, you remember this show, right? Right? Alright, so I'm just gonna address the elephant in the room here. Goblin Slayer as an anime is okay, but the manga is substantially better. But before we get into that, let's catch everyone up to speed here. Goblin Slayer is the anime adaptation of the dark fantasy horror light novels written by Kumo Kagyo, which were then adapted into a manga by Kosuke Kurose. The story follows the adventures of the titular character Goblin Slayer, a warrior that has dedicated his life to the utter eradication of all goblins. Something that makes him seem like an utter lunatic by his fellow adventurers, as goblins are seen as nothing more than mob monsters, something that only really kills villagers and rookies. Nevertheless, Goblin Slayer continues on his quest and eventually runs into a newcomer adventurer that he conveniently saves during one of his slaughters. Since her party was torn apart by the green little bastards, she decides to join his quest, and that's the basic premise. There's also a side plot about the impact left on the world after the final battle with the Demon Lord, who nearly ended mankind but was defeated by the hero and her party, and how the growing number of monsters in the world might be a sign of his return, but who cares about any of that? Goblin Slayer only thinks about one thing, and that is the genocide of all Necrogoblicon fans. And the anime doesn't really focus on anything but that. Sure, there is more to the story than just being Friday the 13th with goblins, but it only has 12 episodes to work with, so you don't have a lot of plot meat. And before anyone asks, no, I'm not gonna make Doomslayer jokes. Putting BFG Division over an action scene doesn't inherently make it funny, you sheep. It wasn't even the best Doom 2016 song. Anyway, the main selling point to this anime was the tone and the violence. Really, Goblin Slayer is a pretty generic anime on paper, but I'm putting that in quotes. Adventurer meets stranger. The two bond as they are pulled into increasingly dangerous missions, eventually culminating in realizing they have larger obligations to the world around them. And that's just the plot line. I'm not even talking about the setting, which is literally just JRPG tropes, or the characters, which once again are basically kind of archetypes. What makes it stand out is that Goblin Slayer is fucking ruthless. Whereas most other fantasy animes would only tease fucked up violence or grotesque ways to die, Goblin Slayer bathes in it. See, while goblins are treated as a joke by every other adventurer in the story, you actually see what they do to people in this, and you perfectly understand why somebody like Goblin Slayer could exist in that world. Not to get too detailed for the sake of spoilers, but Goblin Slayer was heavily traumatized by goblins when he was a child, so bad that he has forsaken any other path in life that doesn't involve killing them all with his bare hands. The first episode, in my opinion, sets this world up perfectly. It follows the group of adventurers that the priestess starts off with, and they are established as a pretty generic JRPG party. You have the bland leader guy that wants to be a hero, the martial arts chick that clearly likes him but wants to be a cock tease, hi Tifa, the glasses girl mage that acts as the straight man, and the newcomer priest girl that wants to help everyone she meets. At first glance, they all seem perfectly capable of taking care of themselves and have the potential to be the legend of the galactic heroes. Well, when they first meet the goblins, it doesn't end well. Yeah, I don't think a health potion can regrow that guy's intestines. Or his liver. Also, Tifa got raped by goblins. Then Goblin Slayer shows up, and it's not even accurate to call it a fight scene. No, it's more like a rabid tiger got let loose in a kindergarten class. As you can see, the world of Goblin Slayer is generic JRPG fantasy, but it actually shows all the fucked up parts that are typically glossed over when you play something like Tales of Vesperia. In this world, if you get kidnapped by goblins, you're not gonna magically be saved by the protagonist without a scratch. Best case scenario, you're disfigured and tortured stupid because they think it's funny. Worst case scenario, you're raped and used to breed a new generation of goblins, and when you outlive your usefulness, they'll mutilate and eat you. Goblin Slayer does a fantastic job at making you hate the fuckers, and you want to see them suffer. The character himself is great too. He's clever, professional, and an absolute beast when he gets pissed off. To put it bluntly, Goblin Slayer is like a mixture of Geralt and Guts from Berserk. You have a traumatized warrior who is a professional monster hunter and has declared lifelong war on the creatures he blames for ruining his life, and uses every strategy he can think of to complete his objective. Every strategy. Dude is an absolute badass, and his cold, detached way of speaking fits the character well. The guy is clearly not okay in the head, and has simply seen way too much fucked up shit. It's a great contrast to the priestess, who is far less experienced. She's naive about the world, and acts as the human connection for the audience to latch onto. It's that piece of humanity that keeps us engaged with this very twisted story. There are other characters beyond these two. You have Goblin Slayer's childhood friend, Cowgirl, also known as Miss Mommy Milkers. You have the registration chick at the Adventurers Guild who's tired of sending people out to die, an elf that joins because she wants to have an adventure, a dwarf that, well, is a dwarf, and a lizard guy that acts like a Native American shaman. That dude's pretty cool, I'm not gonna lie. None of the characters really get too much detail or fleshing out. It's definitely enough to do the job, but it's nothing you're really gonna write home about. Nevertheless, the bond between Priestess and Goblin Slayer is the main emphasis of the anime. You see how the two become friends, and Goblin Slayer begins to open up to the people around him. It's not completely inaccurate to call it Berserk's little brother, since it's a dark fantasy horror anime about a traumatized warrior that seeks revenge on the monsters that wronged him, but eventually learns that he can't handle it alone and slowly regains his humanity as he develops a surrogate family and his party members. Okay, it's a lot like Berserk when you really think about it, but Goblin Slayer does more than enough to differentiate itself from that absolute unit of a manga. For one, Goblin Slayer is far more of a dark comedy than anything else. His obsession with goblins is poked fun at more than once, and fantasy tropes are put on blast numerous times. It's nothing that's an outright joke, and really it's more accurate to call this a satire than a comedy, because there are moments where something is called attention to, such as the one bit about the guy having a sword too long to use in a cave, but it's not really anything with a definite punchline. Really, it's more of a drunk fun experience than the genuinely emotional and harrowing one that Berserk is. Unless you're a journalist, then you'll just freak out at the rape and violence and completely ignore how removing those things destroys the tone and atmosphere this story sets up, you fucking brainlets. But there are some legitimate criticisms I have for this anime. Two big ones, much like the Village Girls' titties. For one, the direction is hit and miss. Some episodes capture the spirit of the manga and light novels perfectly. As stated, that first episode is downright incredible. Goblin Slayer was introduced with the exact level of build-up that you needed to get fucking hyped, and the bloodbath that ends the episode sells you on the show completely. Other episodes kind of feel weak, and strangely enough feel like they didn't really get the point of the scene they were adapting. Weekend Warrior has a great video talking about the problem as a whole, so I'll just ask you to check that video out at your own discretion, since he talks about plot stuff and I want to avoid too many details for this review. But I will say this, in the manga and the light novels, Goblin Slayer's obsession is played off like the unhealthy bloodlust that it is. He knows it's going to kill him eventually, but he hates goblins so much that he just doesn't care. He's so consumed with rage that he physically needs to rip them apart. So why did the anime feel the need to paint him out as more of an autist? I'm not kidding. Goblin Slayer feels more awkward than badass in some parts, and I get it, he's seen as a crazy weirdo by the rest of the adventurers, but you don't make him sound like a weirdo. The audience is well aware that his hatred is justified. Maybe it's just a nitpick on my end, which is very possible. However, one flaw that I absolutely feel the need to point out, and is an objective problem with this anime, is the CGI. Goblin Slayer for large chunks of this anime is completely computer generated. Granted, it kind of makes sense. He's completely covered in armor, so animating him in 2D would have been a pain in the ass and takes up a lot of time, but the CGI sticks out like a sore thumb, and it really sucks because it can outright shatter any immersion you had in the scene. And if you don't get why I think it's so bad, here's an example. Imagine you're watching Full Metal Alchemist, and some scenes have Al as completely 2D, well animated and fluid. Then in other scenes, he's randomly a CGI Warhammer figurine. Yeah, it would sort of rip you out of the experience sometimes when it comes out of nowhere. Is it a deal breaker? No, I don't think so. I still enjoyed the show quite a bit, despite the problems it had. But for some people, I can most definitely see them not getting into Goblin Slayer because the anime turned them off, which is sad, because the animation for Goblin Slayer isn't bad. When it's not using CGI, the violence feels satisfying as all hell. The gore certainly isn't that strong. It kinda does that thing that a lot of modern animes do, where gore equals blood jets after dismemberment. I would complain about it, since the manga has some pretty kick-ass gore, but I like blood jets, they're good too. But that's all I can really say about Goblin Slayer. It's a fun anime that's an okay adaptation of the source material. It's definitely not bad, but I have to urge anybody that has checked the show out to read the manga. It has a lot of details and subtleties that the anime missed out on, for one reason or another. If you don't, and seriously just want a mindless bloodbath to check out, then yeah, this show definitely does its job. Until next time, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys. You know, I saw an article complaining that this show is anti-Semitic, but I don't get how you can see a race of long-nosed, malevolent creatures as a decent allegory for Jewish people.
I just want to speak directly to the camera, and I want you to hear this. You are the most unfuckable, repulsive creature. Sad. You're a simp, bro. You're a simpleton. You're a simple mind. You're concerned about other people's relationships instead of improving your own physical appearance and your own ability to attract women.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, they got me there.